All right, so welcome to the conference. I'd like to thank the conference organizers and like to thank the platform of the conference for accepting my proposal. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming to listen to me present on martial arts in the classical Chinese cultural context, which maybe seems like a strange topic, but let's get to it. So martial arts. In the modern day in East Asia, martial arts have spread all over the world. But the interesting thing is that martial arts in the modern day are a type of physical culture, which includes sport and leisure, health practices. But historically, the martial arts were a more complex and highly interwoven thing in East Asian society. And that's been overlooked in modern Western scholarship. And this presentation is part of a larger research project that I'm working on, trying to look at the history of all this and how it interweaves. This presentation is going to focus on the socio-historical vectors and phenomena of the martial arts in traditional China, and examine the social interweave and posits that a fuller and more inclusive approach to the study of this aspect of Chinese culture is necessary. So we have to just talk for a moment about ancient schools of thought that influenced traditional China. Confucianism, which believes in social relationship and order as being core to society. Taoism, sometimes written with a D, sometimes written with a T, but still pronounced Taoism, believed in an overarching organic holism that united all of existence. Moism, the writings of Mozi, believed in a universal force, a qi, an energy that bound things equally into existence. And legalism, which believed in a realistic and material-minded power politic. And this is a very non-spiritual view of the world, but formed a lot of the traditional imperial culture. Chinese medicine, which believed the interwoven patterns of relationship between the body and the natural world were operating at all times. And then military strategy, the military school. And this believed in strategy and techniques to interact with the quantum of the forces that worked in existence. And so it was both military and actually was a philosophical school of thought. So these different schools of thought were all in play in the ancient period. Now, martial arts in traditional Chinese society really relates to something called the Liangbaat, which are the two lines. This term referred to two lines of advisors to the emperor, representing the scholar and religious lines, the literature or literary or cultured lines, and the martial or military, the wu, which are both social venues to power how you could rise up and have a relationship to the rest of society. Western scholarship focused on the social dimensions of the literati because of the Confucian bias and because Western scholars learned from the Qing Dynasty scholars of the 1800s. But the martial and military industrial complex was a big social venue of mobility for a large part of society. And so this shows the social vector of mobility and economic enfranchisement, giving opportunity to those who did not have scholarship talent, which related very much to eyesight, for there were no glasses historically, textural materials that you could get to or own, tutorship and tutelage that you could afford. So martial arts schools need to be considered industry centers rather than sport leisure centers. And they needed workers and supported the whole web of social interactions. So what was the relationship between military and martial arts? Most of Chinese history actually had no standing military. There was a camp system, which was a local militia system, and disparate military training centers existed, training martial arts, war skills, and preparation for military need. The camps were used outside of the planting season to train local people for potential needs for defense. They also served as armories to store weapons, but the camps did not have a clear source of funding. The camps actually had a complex relationship to martial arts halls in Chinese towns and villages to help support them financially. Okay? And what are these martial arts halls, called wuguan in Chinese? The martial arts halls in traditional society held very different place than the martial arts schools in the modern day. Martial arts halls were interwoven in a web of social relationships, providing specific services. They facilitated social, material, and economic dynamics. They were organized in a hierarchical format with a master, a guancang, who was referred to as father, right? Adopted father, respected father, shifu, and members who referred to each other in familial terms, older brother, younger sister, cousin. And this pseudo-family structure created a bond of perceived kinship, a sociological kinship dynamic, perpetuated the safe interactions between them, limited competition through the social vector known as kinship bonding. Now, how did they make money? What did they do? Certainly, they had tuition where you could pay or work on an apprenticeship, but they had festivals, community building, and sporting contests and lion dances and such, that they were part of the community. They had a lineage dynamic where they would trace themselves back to legendary founders, and they would have links to other schools and in society, and this delimited the liminality or danger of these people who were training in war skills. Also, they emphasized moral education, And this delimited the affect and aggression, the emotional dynamics, which could defray the social bonds. So China was a tight-knit society. You often grew up in a village that you lived in your whole life and never left. And there's a lot of tension that you had to basically get rid of. The martial arts schools served as a way to do that, where you could have interactions that were limited. And they inculcated philosophy and religion, and even often housed shrines to the god Guanggong, right? The great sage who is the patron saint of both martial artists, protector of children, and of merchants. They often had shrines or little temples in the martial arts schools. Also, they were physical rehabilitation centers. The martial arts experts did massage, physical therapy, bone setting, things that look like modern chiropractic or like orthopedics, topical herbal medicines, and they were very interwoven with the medical tradition. So if someone got a stroke, they would be sent by the doctor to the martial arts hall to do rehab. Okay? Also, they served as peace officers. They would stop thieves, drunk people. They would get rid of wild animals that came into the town. They stored weapons. They were experts in knot tying to tie someone up who was a criminal. They kept social order. And so they had a prestige and power dynamic in sociology, or an authority and a validity going on. They also served as a night watchman, right, to go around town, because there were no police in traditional China. This was done by people in from the martial arts halls. They also served as protective escorts, bodyguards for large, rich people. They were merchant escorts and transports. They were affiliated with other industries. They often did bricklaying, road building, wall building that they would do in addition to their martial skills. They also were theatrical performers. They would perform lion dances and perform in the operas, and they would dance and do gymnastics. They served as soldiers, as we mentioned before, right, to train or be a militia-type military. They helped with tax collection. They worked with a magistrate to go and force someone to pay their taxes. And also, they sometimes worked in organized crime, where they would intimidate or enforce, working for drug dealers or working for brothels. So they had the whole range of affect. Here's the Silk Routes. Here's a map. We don't have to spend much time on it, but look at this extensive trade network. This extensive trade network could not have operated without people who served as protection and security, and that was the martial arts hall network. Okay? Additionally, here are additional trade routes: the Siberian trade route, the Tea-Horse Road, which ran up into Tibet. All of this required the protection of the goods being moved and relied on the escort service, as we call it, as the Biaozhu system, as they call it in Chinese. So also, we know about the martial arts in relationship to temples often. They're often thought in the West being highly involved. There were martial arts in some temples, notably the Shaolin Temple and the Wudang Mountain temples. However, practical considerations led them there, meaning these temples often had open spaces and a lot of wealth, becoming vulnerable to thievery, and the temple would offer free open space for a martial arts teacher and to use in exchange to receive protection from them. So over time, there was an inevitable blending of martial philosophy and religious ideology, leading to the conjoined understanding of martial arts as somewhat spiritual discipline. So what does this mean? The complexity of this interwoven social vector implies that the martial arts hall served as a social organ in traditional culture. There are four major social aspects to the interweave. Social mobility. It combined power and prestige dynamics of sociology led to status, which correlated with industry and amassed wealth. A social network. The large lineage dynamics, how they felt they were related to these ancient lineages, would lead to a linking of local to municipal to national and often international elements in communication along these sister and brother schools, and camaraderie, fostering stable social bonds and allowing defense mobilization when necessary, but the stable social bonds that encourage trade. The third one, trade promotion in general, the connection to infrastructure development, building roads and walls and storehouses and such, and security and trade movement promoted the movement of goods and services. So the martial arts halls acted as post or parcel delivery, security and shipping and transport, and they even controlled organized crime management so that the organized crime stayed in certain areas, in the organized crime areas. Okay. Social education, lacking a large-scale public educational institution like public schools that didn't exist, the martial arts served as a type of social education. It defrayed affect or emotion in tight-knit residential communities and developed competitive simulations, different types of war games or different types of sparring or fighting, which served to settle differences and vent affect or emotion to avoid violent escalation. It entrained a socially delimited vector of proper delimited virtues of restraint. Proper virtues of restraint became a major idea of the Asian martial arts. Okay, so here's a picture, so we wrap up. This is the Chao family compound, and this is in Chaozhou village in Qi County in Shanxi province in China. It was begun in 1756 and expanded until the 1900s. It's eventually reached a size of 8,725 square meters with 6 large courtyards, 20 smaller courtyards, and 313 rooms. The famous building, it illustrates the interweave of martial arts and the dynamic of life and industry of a highly influential family. And this is a modern map, but here in the lower left corner, there's the martial arts hall, which is part of this massive enclosure. Additionally, they have the Wu Dao Ancestral Temple, which is the martial pathway ancestral temple. That's part of their temple structure. They also have, now in the modern day, it's a film room, but traditionally it was a theater room and an opera stage right next to the martial hall because the martial artists were the performers that would perform. So you see this whole very complex, guarded, walled complex that was related to martial arts and related to their trade and what they could build up. Okay. So last slide, ongoing scholarship. The complexity of the martial arts in the traditional Chinese cultural milieu demands a greater and more granular address in Western scholarship. It's been denied for a long time. The biases derived from the initial contact of Western scholars with the Qing Dynasty Confucian scholars still confounds a fair and balanced view of the martial arts. Further, the sport culture of martial arts in the modern society further colors the lens of analysis and reduces it to a trivial social status, denying its centrality. Only through a new appreciation of the centrality of the martial arts as a major social organ in traditional Chinese society can scholars hope to understand and contextualize the pre-modern period. Okay, so that is my presentation. I'm going to stop here and I'll stop the screen share. Okay, so if there's questions, we could entertain them now or we could hold them to the end.